So it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Moshe Dror.
So I think the subject, or at least the subject matter of the discussion this afternoon is somewhat of a, I don't want to use the word controversial, but it's somewhat of a conversation that at the end of the day, no one can turn around and clearly say, I know, because how can you? We're talking about God. So, as a result, to talk about something, or rather talk about the one who created us, almost in a sense, with respect to somewhat of a joke. How can we really attempt, in a way, to try to understand the knowledge, the wisdom, the intention of our Creator? And yet, God in His wisdom gave us somewhat of a guide to try and give us a way to understand a little bit about Him. And that was through this means called a Torah. And the purpose of the Torah, as I'm sure all of you know, was not exclusively just to go and tell us the history of a people named the Hebrews that came out of Egypt, but rather to give us much more of an insight to what's really going on here. And what was the reason why all of this had to happen in the first place. And to that end, we got the 5 books of the Torah, and alongside that, we got what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. And then there was yet another further tool, which was yet less used and less known, and that was Torah Kabbalah, the mystical teachings of Judaism. And the combination of all create who we are and what we represent. Needless to say, Judaism is known for having many names to describe this Creator of ours. Some are more profound names, some are more names of incredible strength, while other names are more just names of description of certain actions and deeds. Often the question is asked, so which is the name? And often the answer that is given is the name, which usually is called Yud Hey Vav Hey, often pronounced as the word Hashem, the name. And yet there are other very strong dominating names. There's Elohim, there's the Shin Dalet Yud name, there's Kel, there's Tzvakot, there's a lot of other variations of the various names of God. Now it very well could be that other than Rabbi, there's many other great scholars in this room. And I'm here not to claim the wisdom of being the greatest scholar out there. But I am very knowledgeable in very specific pieces. As I'm writing Torah, I come to become aware of Torah. So before we go into the different levels of understanding of the various names of God, I'm just going to take a few moments to share with you a little bit about how it relates to me, personally, as a person who's going to be actually writing God's name, and the ideas that flowed before, during, and after. And with that, we can start maybe to get an understanding of the issue of these names, and then we're going to hopefully try and share with you a little bit more insights to the value of these names and how they represent themselves within our own understanding of Judaism and our daily life. Okay, so that's a long, big task. But let's try. Let's go for it. There are many, many thousands of laws that a sofer has to study and train in to be able to be qualified as a sofer. Of which there probably is only one law that is the predominant law that governs everything else. And that is, a sofer has to train how to be a person who does not make mistakes. I'm not sure how many people you meet walking down the street that their claim to fame is, I don't make mistakes. Well, I'm one of those. I have trained very hard to be able to become and hold that title of someone who doesn't make mistakes. Come on, you're human. Get over it. People make mistakes. Yes, but no. Mistakes are a human nature. We will make mistakes. However, when one has taken upon themselves a notion of doing something that's very high regarded, there's no room for error, as they say. What is going to be the most important aspect of becoming a sofer and writing Torah? It's coming to the point where I will take a quill in hand, and with no fanfare, I'm going to be writing God's name. And obviously, one has to make sure that the writing of that name is done so perfectly that no error would ever take place. For fear of making an error, it becomes extremely problematic in trying to fix this error, let alone the spiritual and emotional aspect of a person writing and making a mistake in writing God's name. So therefore, to try to remove any of those connotations that could occur in making a mistake, the extra effort goes into practicing and practicing and then until we are so good at it to the point where mistakes don't happen. And all the precautions are taking place. Now, when it comes to actually writing God's name, there's a little bit of a technicality actually of how one should really go about it. And I'm just going to share this with you easily. We dip the quill into the ink well, and we get ink. The first place where errors can take place is at that very moment. When you pick up that ink on the quill, it usually creates what we call like a little blob of ink. And if you just, by accident, just shake your hand a little bit too much, guess what's going to happen? A blob of ink will come out, let alone if you started writing and you've made your mistake before you even begun. To avoid that, every single trained sofer will tell you that when you begin to write God's name, you never start with God's name. You will always write at least one letter of the word before that prior. That if a mistake would have to happen from that blob, it will happen on another letter not related to God's name. Now here comes the next part, is that one has to be sure that you have enough ink in your quill to be able to write the full name of God. Because that's all you need to be writing God's name, and halfway through you run out of ink. And now you have to go through it again. Now, so say 1 second, Rabbi Jordan. Very simple. If that's what happened, let's say, dip your ink in again, take a little piece of parchment, write a letter or two, and if it's going good, go back and write God's name. You're forgetting one thing. There is something what's called lekadesh et Hashem, which means that before we start to write God's name, we actually have to set our mind. We say l'shem mitzvat k'tivat kedushat Hashem. We're going to be writing the holy name of God. We have to sanctify that in our head. So therefore, while we're writing, the ink that we're using right now, for better or worse, cannot be used for writing anything else, even Torah, other than God's name. So if I've sanctified that ink is now going to be used for no other reason other than writing God's name.
It's a good thing they reduced the name from 70 letters down to 4.
Can you imagine? Okay? So now we have the reality of when we're going to write, we're going to make sure that we started the writing right before. We're going to now say l'shem mitzvat, and we're going to write the full name of God with yet enough ink to be able to continue then writing so we do not finish it in the middle. But when we started to sanctify God's name, it was written with the ink that was right then and there. What happens if someone makes a mistake? Not me. But what happens if a sofer makes a mistake in writing God's name? So over and above that, it's extremely emotionally embarrassing that one allowed himself to falter on all the precautions that could have and should have and would have been in place. It's a problem. Because you can, unlike other letters in Torah, the ink sits as a little mound on top of the parchment. So if a mistake was made, you just simply take a little razor or something sharp and you can peel the ink off, rub it down, and I can write that letter again, and you would never know that anything ever happened. The problem is you cannot erase God's name, even if it was written incorrectly or whatever the story is. So you cannot erase it. So now the really only true solution, if you will, you would have to, and this is one of the halachot, you would actually have to cut out God's name, make a hole there. However, you'd have to cut out the word before and the word after. So we're talking about a minimum of 3 words. Then you would have to put the patch, make sure there's the score on the parchment, and then start again, writing those 3 words in one spot. Now you have a patch. What happens if God's name was at the end of the line? So you're making a cut here, and you're making a cut. So often, in most cases, if the name of God had a mistake in it, traditionally we just simply replace the entire sheet. We just don't even bother with trying to fix it and making it look good again. We don't even go there. So that's the general aspect of restoration. Now, it is very interesting that one of the preparations that a sofer will take before writing Torah, but primarily for the purpose of writing God's name, is that we would go to the mikveh. We would go to the mikveh before we start to write. So when we come to write God's name, we are at a state of writing God's name b'kedusha, in holiness. Now, for example, what we're doing over here, God's name is already filled in. So therefore, there's no issues of me making mistakes, kedusha, all of those issues we've just completely eliminated. Now, it's not done anymore, to my knowledge, but once upon a time, there had been sofrim that wanted to really go the extra mile in kedusha, in making this Torah holy. And what they would do is they would start writing the Torah. And every time there was God's name coming up, they wouldn't write God's name. They'd leave the space and continue writing, and leave another space, and then continue writing. And they would write an entire sheet without God's name. Then they would go to the mikveh and write only God's name again and again and again and again in all the different spaces.
What about the whole thing about having ink from the letter before and after?
That's where it gets very complicated, and this was talking about very much, that's what I'm saying, there's multiple reasons why it's not done anymore. Amongst them that are talent of being able to be so precise as there, people not wanting to make mistakes, etc. But it became almost an impossibility to go out and do it. But the correct way is that you go to the mikveh and you start writing and you say L'Shem Kedushat every time. And by the way, it is a question, halachically, if a person was writing God's name and he turns around and says, oh no, did I say L'Shem Kedushat? Darn it. And it gets into a question if that Torah would be kosher. This is not a joke. So therefore, when it says that a sofer has to be in a state of concentration and no disturbance, this is real. And that's why if you go into any room of a sofer, you're going to see we will have, plastered all over the place. L'Shem Kedushat, L'Shem to constantly remind us that we have to be focused on what we're doing, especially when we're going to be coming to write God's name. Okay, so that's some of the technicalities. I'm sure there's a little bit more which I haven't thought of, but that's the basics of it.
Could you just say a little bit about the different kinds of things that Sofrim write and why you practice with one particular text that you write first, right?
Okay, that was, because I said it earlier, I forgot that I had mentioned in this case. But it's actually fascinating that as a result of the need to make sure that we become master, not making mistake people, when a sofer begins to write, the main 4 objects that we write is Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzah, Megillat Esther, the Book of Esther. What will happen is that a sofer will actually write the object that does not have God's name in it. And which one is that? Mezuzah has God's name, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Which one?
Esther.
The Book of Esther. The Book of Esther, Megillat Esther, does not have God's name in it. As a result, Sofrim always first write 1, 2, 3, 10, 15, 20 Megillot until they get it right. Until they write it from the first Vayi Bimach till the last L'chol Zaro, every single word without a blink, without a question, without having to script. If it's perfect multiple times, then he's able to qualify and get on to writing a mezuzah. That's when you get tested, you get your stamp as a sofer. But the Megillah usually is where Sofrim mostly practice, if you will.
Are they always men?
Huh? Not always, but traditionally, it's usually would be something that later on in a woman's life cycle she would be able to become. But traditionally and over the history, it's primarily been men. So that's been really the area. I mean, I'm not a good example of this particular game of writing Megillot. because while many of my colleagues, I wanted to start writing, and I think we were a group of some 25 boys who started practicing, only 3 ended up being sofrim. I was one of them. But while all of the others wrote many Megillot before they were able to qualify and write their first mezuzah, I ended up writing only 1 Megillah. That was all I needed, and I was ready to go. Okay, so those who were training me, because to become a sofer you have to work as an apprentice under someone else, those who were training me said, "You're ready to go," and I was on to writing my first mezuzah. So I'm not really the good rule of thumb, but the concept is that you really are meant to write many Megillot until you really get it right. Okay, so now we're talking about these names of Hashem. So we've just described some physical elements of how we try in multiple ways to do this in the holiest concept. But really the underlying question is, why? And if I didn't, I mean, between you and me, there's no lightning happening, okay? There's no cameras watching. So big deal.
Oh, there is.
Oh, okay, take it out, okay? So I really better write it correctly, okay? But if, big deal. And if I didn't write it in holiness, and if I didn't write it big kedusha, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? So the truth is, obviously, nothing physically is going to necessarily hit me and strike me or whatever. I got the message. Something like that.
Do you also have signs on your walls that say no cell phones?
No, we don't bring in cell phones in whatsoever. They're not anywhere around. They're probably one of the only places, well, there, the NASA, a few other spots, that no cell phones are allowed. But they should be banned in the schools sometime. So how do we know anything about these gods' names to begin with? So really to get to the point of understanding the significance and the meaning and Kedusha in the first place, like anything, it's always good to go back to the source, right to the beginning. And at the beginning, that's where you start getting your Mora Derech, your guidance, which way to go and which way to understand. So the first time we come upon God's name is in the beginning. What are the first 3 words of Torah? Ouch! That hurt. Did you say which name? Okay. If I had to ask any one of you, which is the name, without knowing the whys and the whos and the real significance, but to your general knowledge, which is the name of God, the ultimate name, the all-powerful name, the good and bad, all-inclusive, under which banner name is? That's the name. That is the name. We know that. We may not always understand the why, but that is the name. Start again. Bereshit bara. Which name? What am I missing? That makes no sense. We're talking about, this is not the planning stages. Many of you who've come up to write in the Torah with me, I tell you, this is not a practice sheet. We're writing the real Torah now. We really better get it right. We don't want to make a mistake now. In the practice stage, if you wanted, we could play around. I had a program with the older teens. We were practicing and they messed up. Mazel tov. But they weren't writing Torah at that moment. God's going to create the world. This is the moment. And call it, doesn't show up, or sends the wrong representative. By the way, and you can start checking me out on what I'm about to say, and that is that the first day of creation, only one name of God is used. That's Elohim. Day 2, only one name of God is used. Elohim. In fact, you go through the entire 6 days of creation, only one name is used. You come to Shabbat. Vayechulu hashamayim v'aretz v'chol tzivam vayichal Elohim b'yom hashim melachto asher asa vayishba b'mikom melachto asher asa vayivarach Elohim et yom hashim v'kedeshato ki v'osham mikom melachto asher bara Elohim lasod. It's over. Creation is over, and this other name has been there all along. Turn the page. You know what happens next? Ouch! Vayihi biyom bara. It was on the day that was created by, suddenly, good morning, Elijah. You've just woken up. Right, as we say, Boker Tov Eliyahu. I don't know. Okay? Good morning, Joe. Or whatever it is, right? Suddenly he wakes up. And suddenly, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and Elohim begin to appear as a double name throughout the entire next few chapters. You know what it's like? Can you imagine? There's an election. And during the election, there's the potential president, and he's on the campaign, and the potential vice president, he's on the campaign, and both sides. So it could be that you may be at a rally that's this guy here, or that guy's there, or a third person, another. But comes inauguration day. Who's the person who's supposed to take the oath? Could you imagine? The Chief Justice says, and let the President of the United States come up and take the oath. And up jumps the Vice President, says, okay, I'm here. And they say, no. It's supposed to be the President-elect. If you win in 4 or 8 years, you can do it. He says, yeah, but the guy's down in Palm Beach right now. I'm sorry, he's having vacation now. We say, we're sorry, Mr. Vice President.
Sounds like a true story.
But it's not supposed to be you. Where was Yud-Kei Vav-Kei at the time when he had to be there? Okay. So now we're going to start to scratch. See how deep we can go. Okay, see how far you can follow with me. So the big difference between God's creation and you and me creating, it's one fundamental difference. Anything you and I create, we are creating something from something. It was there before us. We took it one object, we turned it around and reshaped it and made another object. There was something there before us. While the creation of this world was creating something from nothing. We have no clue how that's done and how to do that. And yet that's what God did. Okay. Try to stay with me on this. It was a very funny, I can't remember who it was. Oh man. I can't remember who the scholar was. Some atheist came to this great scholar, I'm not sure if it was a rabbi or not even, and he started saying, what kind of a God that allows this, and he does that, and he does this and that? I don't believe in that God. And this scholar turned around and says, you know what? You're right. I don't believe in that kind of a God either. If that's all the God does, I don't like him either. You're right. If it's only a God of ku, that's God? God has to be much bigger and better than that. Absolutely. And if he's not, that God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. That's a very powerful statement. So what do we believe in? What kind of God would make sense? Surely it has to be a God that's not bound by space. God could watch me right here and watch my family in Miami exactly at the same time without any hesitations or reservations. He can be there yesterday, today, and tomorrow all equally. Not only physically, but the most spiritual existence out there. To the point, God is, he is the wisdom, he is the thought, and he's the one thinking, all at the same time. That's as Maimonides says. That's Maimonides. It's something that the brain cannot comprehend. So this God now, who's, ever heard of that song? Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. You know that song? Up, up, down, down, right, left, all around, here, there, everywhere. That's where he can be found. That's the song. But think how true it is.
You use that for the lulav.
We use this for God too. God is here and there. There's no space. Think of it. That's not God. In the true essence of God, this is God, this is God. You're part of God. It all is. So now God wants to try to create a world that is such an oxymoron to the concept of God. Something very strange happens. Had God created world in the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, all he really would have been doing would have been creating another nothing. It would just be creating another entity which had no essence of itself, just another manifest of himself. Because when you're in nothing, and you add more nothing, and more nothing, and more nothing, so something very strange happened. As we say, a lot of these names of God are often there for us to comprehend and relate to God. When it says the hand of God, oh, but God has one hand, that's a funny look of God, okay? So it's really more of an expression for us humans to relate to the concepts related at that point. Bereshit bara Elokim. So suddenly it says that this name was used for a very specific purpose, because it had the purpose of creating an entity. The key phrase is tzimtzum, which means to condense, for a lack of a better word, his existence and manifest itself eventually into something physical that can seem to be separate than God. That's practically, in our mind, impossible for an entity that includes everything as God. There's no space, concept, thought that isn't God. If you're thinking it, it's God. If you're here, you're God. You're God. I love that pen. No, what do you mean pen? It's all God. It's all, everything is God. So God, to try to create an existence that seemed to be other than himself, he had to use a means that would actually condense to a point where it could seem to be living independently and by itself. Now, often one of the challenges that Judaism is confronted with is that how can Judaism coexist with nature? You know, there's the forces of nature, and then we say there's the forces of God. How do the two go hand in hand? Here comes the funny part. According to Kabbalistic teachings, God and nature are actually one. Better yet, God used the tool called nature to create the world. Wait, is that contradicting Judaism? I thought we said God created the world. No. I'm now turning around and saying, nature, that's how this world was created. Ouch. Is this going against everything we've learned until now? So, we have the name Elohim. So can we let's spell it. Aleph, okay, then we have the Lamed, okay, then we have the A, the Yud, and the Mem. We get it right? Okay, let's put this into numerical values. Aleph equals
1.
Lamed,
30.
A,
10.
Yud, and
40.
40. Give me a total.
86.
How do we say nature in Hebrew? Teva. The nature of creating this world through the nature. Here comes the word. Let's do the numbers. Hey is
5. 2, 2, 7.
86. So it says that when God created this world, what he was doing, he was actually creating this world through nature. And that was the purpose. That was the purpose. The purpose of this creation was actually to bring a force called nature into existence. And this nature seems to have almost independent powers. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. Rain, snow, heat, it's nature. And he creates the entire world. And then he creates mankind, Adam and Chava. But then came a problem. Ouch. What was the problem? Us humans, we don't fit the profile of nature. Because there's one element that does not exist in nature. And what is that? What's the one element that does not exist in nature? And in fact, we say that this was created after nature. After this world was created, it was only added in later. But in nature, this element does not exist.
Holiness?
It's called the L word. Love and mercy. There's no mercy in nature. I lived in South Africa for many years. I've been to the jungle, to the game reserve. I've seen kills. It's never happened before that the lion, catching the springbuck, sort of deer, about to take the bite of death, and the springbuck turns around to the lion and says, "Please, please, please, have mercy on me. Let me go, count to 10, and if you get me after 10, then eat me." That doesn't happen. Because there's no mercy in nature. Elohim, while very nature-orientated, as this entire world was created, and we believe in nature. Of course we believe. This is the way God made it. And yet there was an element missing. It was something that we like to call higher and greater than nature. And that is something that us humans, technically, without it, could not comprehend, because we were born to be living in a natural and nature-driven world. Now, what would that really mean? That would mean that most of us would probably not live past the age of 2 or 3. Because we were bound to do something bad, according to the rules of nature, boom, you get zapped. You don't get a second chance. Second chance only comes and is only derived from the word mercy. When you can have compassion to someone. So it says that after creation, suddenly the power that governs higher than nature suddenly appears. And that name actually represents mercy, kindness, that did not exist in the world in the natural form that it was created. So now we're starting to get a different perspective on looking at these different names. The name Elohim represents you and me and the functioning of this world. This is it. By the way, we all believe in Elohim very, very, very much because we live by it every day. We drive our car, we're governed by the rules of nature. You better believe it. And you better be accountable for it, because it's going to hit. Some days up, some days down. Those are the rules of Elohim/nature. We are governed by it. I am no different than you. And yet, as Jews, we also believe there's a higher source. There's a higher energy, if you will, that allows us to sustain ourselves in this world. And that's the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. And that's why when we say our blessings, we say Baruch Atah, because that's the name of God representing a name that's higher. Now, one of the more profound places where the clarity of these two names appear happens to be in one of the most profound prayers that we have as a Jewish people. So which is the prayer that any Jew here, Argentina, Australia, Olamutz, everyone know this prayer? Which one is the Hebrew Jewish prayer that everyone knows? Shema Yisrael. We all know it. We all know it. By the way, before I get into the actual explanation of it, does anyone know who was the first to say Shema? Anyone? Who was the first to make this incredible statement called Shema Yisrael?
Rabbi Akiva?
Okay. To understand the answer, so God made this world. What we didn't ask was, why? If God is so perfect, and in His realm, everything is great, what was He missing? What was God lacking that He had to make this place in the first place? You know, when you go and buy a car, we say, why'd you buy a car? We say, well, no, I have to go to shopping. There's a reason. Okay? Everything you do is governed by some type of a reason. Sometimes it's an esoteric reason. Sometimes it's a reason I haven't thought much about. But there's always going to be a reason why we do things. Right? And if you don't have a reason, you don't belong around normal people. Because normal people have reasons why they do things. So the question is, why did God make this world?
He wanted children.
So here's the answer. according to the way it's brought down traditionally, the reasons. Follow me on this one. In God's realm, okay, stop. I'll do it this way. That sounds like a strike of a match, right? If you take a match and you light a candle, 12 o'clock, midday, and you walk out with this candle outside, there's no breeze, no cloud, no shadows, and you hold up that candle, there's only the candle and the sun. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Not only will that candle not produce any light, you will not see the flame. The flame will be nullified. In fact, when I remember hearing this little parable, I didn't believe it. And I took the candle, I went outside, and I didn't see anything. Oh, it must have been blown out. Ow! It was definitely there, and yet it couldn't be seen. Yet you take that same candle, okay, different match, and you light it 12 o'clock midnight, and you take it into the cellar, and you hold it up. What happens now? Not only does it lights up the whole room. So I ask you, same candle, why outside, not only does it not produce light, you cannot even see the flame. And in a dark room, suddenly, ta-da! It lights up the room. What's the answer? How can that be? How can that phenomena be? I mean, that would almost be, with respect, as stupid as saying that when I go outside, I'm nice. When you put me in a dark room, I become a monster. That makes no sense. But maybe it does. Why is the difference? And so all of you, once you hear it, it's obvious. The answer is called contrast. That's the answer. A little flame of a candle next to the light of the sun, in contrast, that light is zero. It's non-existent. Suddenly you take that candle and you bring it into a dark room, and the darker the room, so greater the light. The contrast allows the light to shine. Could you imagine your child comes home from school one day, and he opens up this piece of paper and says, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, take a look. And they open it up, and in there, you see they got 100% on their test. You say, wow, that's fantastic, that's beautiful. How much did the rest of the class get in this test? And the kid very bashfully says, everybody got 100. In fact, for the last 6 months, everyone gets hundreds. So now what do you think? Either the teacher didn't know how to teach, the subject was so easy, you were all cheating. Suddenly that big 100 wasn't there. If the kid comes home from school and says, Mom and Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, take a look, and it's 100. And they say, so what did everyone else get? And you say, well, the next kid behind me, they got 42%. Wow! You're unbelievable! It's the same 100. The key phrase is contrast. How about if we all decide with Rabbi's agreement, we're all going to go and run the marathon, starting on your mark, get set, go. And we all get up and run for 3 days straight.
Right.
And at the end of 3 days, miraculously, all of us finished at the finish line exactly at the same time. Do I get the trophy?
Yes. Everybody gets.
That's the sad thing in this world. No one gets.
Oh.
Unfortunately, the way this world works, in order for there to be a winner, guess what? There has to be a loser out there. That's the way it works. It's the contrast. Because if we were all winners, no one's getting trophies. It's like that 100. You can light 1 million candles outside 12 o'clock midday with the sun, and it's not going to produce any more light. Because the light of the sun is so great.
But it'll produce heat.
Yeah, you get burnt. You're right. I felt it. Now let's take it up a notch. So I'm a freshman upstairs. I served my 120 years. I took my tax on that. It was 180. I stayed here for a long time. But eventually, I'm upstairs. I'm walking around, and I see someone schlepping books. I'm a nice guy. I said, I'm going to go and help. So I go and help schlep the books from here to there. Then I see a friend of mine. I say, hey, I just did a mitzvah. I just did a good deed. My friend's going to look at me and says, you did what? I said, I did something good. He says, what are you talking about? You're in the presence of God. Everything is good. Show me a space that isn't, that's lacking, that's missing. It's like lighting another candle next to that sun. Did you add any light next to the sun? If you did nothing. It's so bright already that your little light, it's nullified, it's not there. Your little mitzvah, in a sense, technically, up in heaven, is nothing. It's nullified in the presence of everything that's good. Okay, here's a hard one. Can there be a recognition of kedusha, of holiness, up in heaven in the presence of God? Think of it. Think of it. If here, there, up, down, inside and outside, it's all holy, can I now suddenly go and do something holy? It is already! Okay, here's the most difficult of them all. And this really, it's all right if you don't get it. Can there be a recognition of God up in heaven? That's a scary thought. If me and you are all part of God, my brain and my toes are all part of God. We all are God. I am God. You are God. We all fall into that trap of being this oneness of God. So can there be an outside entity to say, oh, I'm not God, but I can recognize there is a God? No, you already are. So maybe here comes a little glimpse to the why. Why God had in his, sometimes we think, Meshuggah ideas, to create this world. Because maybe, just maybe, he wanted to create through nature an existence like you and me, that we can wake up in the morning and say, God? What God? Never heard of him. Are you there? And all of us in our own way, in our own journey of life, with our own teachings of our parents, of our rabbis, our teachers, to come somehow to the recognition that as much as I'm here and I'm me and I really feel, ow, that hurt, I'm really real, I can come to the recognition that there is an entity called God out there. Wow. So, bear with me on this. So God wanted to create a world through nature that seemingly would be separate than himself. An entity, a dark room. By the way, footnote. When does the light shine more? In a well-lit room or in a very dark room? What kind of world did God make? A very well-lit room, or sometimes it seems to be a very dark room? Because that's where the light can shine. But hold that thought. So God makes this world, and he puts Adam and Eve into it. And for a lack of a better choice of description, their job was to come and recognize that yes, there is a creator to this world. Yesh Adon lebirazu. There's a master to this universe. And guess what? They did. They spoke, they messed up, they got punished, but there was relationship going on here. Wait, let me ask you a question. Were Adam and Eve considered the first Jews?
No.
Why not? They fulfilled the purpose of creation. It wasn't the elephants, it wasn't the penguins. Those are nice animals, but it wasn't them. Why didn't Adam and Eve get the title? There may be many answers out there, but one little answer we can surely suggest. While they surely did, that there's a God in this world, what they were not able to do was to take this incredible message and reality and pass it on to their children. To get it in the same way. So the Torah tells us that there were 10 generations that go by. And who comes onto the scene? It was the famous zookeeper on the boat. Who was that guy? Noah ish tzaddik. He was now a righteous guy. Right? Are we called the children of Noah? And he was a great guy. He saved the world. We won't even get into what happened and why God wanted to destroy it and bring it. Here was a guy who was in proper contact, recognizing that in this universe of craziness, there is a God. He surely should have gotten the title. So let's say again. He may have had many good points, many bad points, we don't know. But surely one. He wasn't able to pass it on to his children. The Torah tells us there was another 10 generations that go by. And some...
Wasn't the, I don't remember the Hebrew word, but he was righteous for his times?
That's according to the commentaries, right? Each tzaddik b'dorotav, exactly, 100%. And so there's many comments. Was it for his time? Was he better? Was he worse? If he would have been in the time of Abraham, he may not have been such a righteous guy. But regardless of it, he communicated with a God. He was speaking.
That fills in, that supports your concept of contrast.
Yeah,
Because
contrast makes a big difference over here compared to where you are, absolutely. And by the way, the Torah tells us that there were other great people living at the different times. There was Shelach, and there was Shem and Ever. There was other great people at different times in these two periods. Then the Torah tells us, we come upon who? Good old Abraham, right? Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu. Why did they get the title? Why did they get the title of being the first Jews? I mean, surely Noach spoke to God as much as Abraham did. Surely Methuselah and Shem and Ever. There was other people who were there. For the first time, what they did different than everyone else, for the first time in history, you know what it's like? Could you imagine you go to Hawaii on the lifetime of a vacation? No, but I'm talking about you go there and it's the experience of a lifetime. You fall in love with the place. You live it and breathe it. It's the most unbelievable experience. You go to Kona Beach, fantastic place, let me tell you. Okay? And...
Are you hanging out with Lou today?
Is that his name?
Yeah.
Okay, I fixed the Torah Kona Beach
Okay,
as
good,
well.
thanks.
Okay.
Oh.
But be it as it may, you come back. And the next thing you find yourself doing is you're telling everybody about this incredible vacation you had in Hawaii. And you're saying it's great and it's wonderful, it's beautiful. And you know what everyone else is doing? Oh, really? It was so nice. Oh, good. Shut up already. Oh, we're so glad that you had we're so happy for you. Now you be quiet. Okay? He lived it. He feels it. But all of us, at the best, we're jealous. At the worst, we just want to tell them, be quiet. It's enough. Let me talk about my life. But could you imagine if he turns around and tells you about Hawaii, and the next thing you know, you're saying, I feel like I was there. I'm living. Wow, that was those waves. Oh, my breath. Suddenly, it's as if you were there. Wow, what a good storyteller you would be.
Yeah.
But could you imagine? This is really what happened with Avram and Sarah. Here they're raising a little child called Yitzchak. And for the first time in history, parents were able to pass on the message that there's a creator in this world to their child. They got qualified as the first Jews. And yet, are we called the children of Abraham and Sarah? That's not our title. What's wrong? What did they do wrong? Well, they had two. Abraham had two kids. He had Isaac and he had Ishmael. And while Isaac got it, Ishmael didn't. We go and jump to the next pair. Isaac and Rebekah. Yes, they are considered the next Jewish parents. Why? Because once again they were able to pass on the message l'dor v'dor to the next generation. The next child got that there is a God to this world, and there's a reason for living. We are not just animals walking on 2 feet. We're not only just simply humans with no purpose. We are people who are driven by a divine purpose and divine reason. And Jacob got it. But why did Yitzchak and Rivka get the name of we are the children of Isaac and Rebekah? Because they had the other son. They had Esau. So now we're coming to the end of the story, ladies and gentlemen, at least at this part. The Midrash does tell us that Yaakov is on his deathbed, and all his children are gathered around. The 12 sons, with Dinah. There are those who suggest that with every son there was a twin daughter, so it's 24. It's a big family. And they're looking at their father, his last moments, and he starts crying. And the children say, Abba, Tati, Father, Dad, why are you crying? He says, my kindalach, you don't get it. You just don't get it. He said, look at my grandfather, Abraham, my grandmother, Sarah. All they had to do in their lifetime, this is all they had to do, was pass on a message that there's a God to 2 kids. That's all they had to do. And they failed 50%. My uncle, Ishmael, didn't get it. He said, look at my father Isaac. He was considered Bechir Havot. He was considered the holiest of the father. All they had to do was pass it on to me and my twin. That's all it was. I got it, my twin brother didn't. And he said, "Oy Gewalt, look at me." I always like to say, if anyone enjoys soap operas, all you need to do is read the story of Jacob and his family. You will never, ever have to follow and watch a soap opera again. It has it all, the good, the conniving, the lying, the cheating, the killing. It has all the ugly, it has everything in there. He says, my father and grandpa, they did, and I'm going to succeed. Look at you guys. How could I pass this on to look at the way you all live your lives in so many different ways? Yet at that very moment, the magic of creation took place. That was the moment. And that's why in Argentina and in Australia and here in California, no matter where a Jew might be, and you ask them what's the most important prayer, they will cry out the word Shema Yisrael. Because at that very moment, the first magic of Judaism took place. And all the children, in one voice, in unison, they all cried out, Shema Yisrael, our Father Israel, listen! Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. We got it! We got that there's a God in this world. And it had nothing to do with how smart someone was, and how goody-goody, and how holy and righteous, and observant. Nothing. They all got the message that there's a God in this world. And what did Jacob say when he heard those incredible words? What is those special words he said quietly? And we only say it loud once a year on Yom Kippur. He said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Jacob burst out in tears of joy now. And he said, blessed is God forever and ever. I succeeded! I did it! My entire family got it. Look at each other around. You are part of this family. So am I. We are part of this non-stop, ever-living Shema Yisrael. We are committed to the fact that there is a purpose to this world. Do I understand all of it? No way, Jose. Do I agree with everything? Who's me to agree or not agree? But I don't. Do I have questions on it? For sure. But it doesn't change our conviction of knowledge that there is a reason. And sometimes the reasons are beyond me. And sometimes I don't get it all. Just like my kids don't always get what I tell them. But I still expect them to love me. If not, I'm going to punch the dog. So the Shema Yisrael really became the centerpiece of our awareness that there is a God in this world. But in it lies so much confusion and question. If we're trying to say that there's one God, for all those who know Hebrew, does anyone know how you say the word single in Hebrew? Only? Yachid. Usually the word echad represents echad, shtayim, shalosh. Ouch. Good question. Shouldn't it have said Shema Yisrael, Yachid? There's only one God. If you're trying to say there's one God, you can easily say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Echad. Easy. What's this? Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What's this doubling up? By the way, in the Talmud, which often many people mistake it only for just books of laws, it talks about a lot of morals and values and mystical concepts as well. And it talks about the Shema. And it says there, in discussion about the Shema, it says, Tanu Rabbanan, our sages taught us, that whoever says the phrase Shema Yisrael until the word Echad will be blessed with long life. Pabam. And one of the sages emphasizes and says, the stressing that it says whoever lengthens the word Echad with the letter Dalet, that's the blessing for long life. And one other guy peeps up and says, as long as you can say the word Echad without skipping the Chet. It almost sounds like a Purim story. Like Purim Torah. They turn with the drink and says, oh, if you say the Echad, I'm going to give you this. If you say that, I'll give you that. With respect, that's what it sounds like. Two sages talking about it. If you stress the letter Dalet, you get long life. And the guy says, yeah, but don't forget the Chet. Can anyone say the word Echad and stress the Dalet? Go for it. No, I said about, you want long life, don't you? Long, it's da. You can't. So the guy was drunk. Can you say the word echad without the chet? Say it. Ed? I mean, it's happened. I'm guilty as charged. Sometimes I'm very much rushed, and I'm going to say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Chad. I might skip the aleph by accident. That could be. But you can't say the word without the chet. It just doesn't, like Hashem Ed? Like, oh, which planet do you come from, right? So you have to say it right. So this guy is saying stress the dalet. This guy is saying don't forget the chet. Another guy comes in, this was Rabbi Meir, and he says, and just as a footnote for all of you people, humans, when you say the Shema, until the word Echad, you have to have intention of the heart. After that, if you didn't have the proper intentions, you're forgiven. But when you're saying Shema, you have to have the intention of the heart until the word Echad. So gosh, these questions are complicated questions. But in the answers of these questions, suddenly the revelation of the differences of these names and the significance of what they represent in the real life, it comes about. Give me time because I can go on for the next 2 hours.
We're at time.
Oh wow. We're mamish at time.
Oh, yeah. Concluding thought.
A concluding thought. Ouch. I will jump to the tail end. Give me 3 minutes. May I? You're running, okay.
Well,
I'll try to do it in 2. Okay. Just that you are not left with nothing that you can physically relate to on a day-to-day. The word echad is broken up into 3 letters. Aleph, Chet, Dalet. It says the Aleph represents the Yachid in the world, the single element, this creator called God. So we believe that there's one God who has knowledge and in control of this place. Then there's the letter Chet. The letter Chet is made up of 2 letters. It's made up of 7 plus 1. That makes the number 8. What's the significance of 7 plus 1? So it says that there are 7 levels of heaven. Sheva Rekim, Zayin Rekim. This is Kabbalah. And it says yet that the soul, the neshama that each of all of us have, transcends down 7 levels through the 7 different levels of heaven. And it ends up where? Not in the levels of heaven, but on the 8th level. That's this world. So where's your soul? Down here on this planet. And yet, anyone sitting around this table and tells me that they can't, I tell them, your soul comes from the highest level, 7 heavens up. So the power that you do have to be the best husband, the best wife, the best Jew, the best student, the best member of the shul, is in your power. Because you have a part of God inside of you that transcends the highest way possible. So no one here can ever have the excuse and say, Rabbi, you're such a holy, you know so much, but me, I can't. No. Your soul and your soul and your soul are all equal in the fact that it transcends straight from the highest source. Or as they say in the classics, God makes no junk. And we are all special. We all have something very godly inside of us. And yet, even with that knowledge that we are princes and princesses and we can go and do the best that we can in this world, never settling for second best, coming to minyan and doing mitzvot and being kind to our neighbors and doing all the good things. But then comes the one last piece. I'll do it in shul. You know what? When I'm home with my kids, I'm okay. My grandparents, when they lived in Russia, that was easy. But America, it's Andres, it's different. I can't do it here. Comes the Dalet. The Dalet represents the 4 corners, the 4 winds of the world, the 4 directions. What's the stressing of the Dalet? Is that your ability to recognize that there's a God in this world, And that you have a purpose for living in this world exists where? In the Dalit, in the four corners of the world. And no matter where you come from, and where you end up being, that's where the recognition that there's a God has to be presented. It has to be shouted out loud, not physically necessarily by words, but in your actions. If it creeps in and says, yeah, but I can't do it, that's why the Rabbi Meir said, don't forget the chet. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you come from. So therefore, when a person can realize that the purpose of our living is an incredible mission. It's not a mission of lying down and just giving up because I'm told to. But rather it's a mission of constantly living up to the highest standards of our morality, of our mitzvot, being quality people. And that exists where? In the four corners of the world, wherever we may be. Having said that, l'chaim to all of you, happy Purim.
Thank you, Rabbi Druin.
It says, by the way, that Purim is greater than Yom Kippur. Did you know that?
As in the next world, every day will not be Yom Kippurim, it'll be Yom Kippurim.
Right.
Day like Purim.
It's the day like Purim. Because what we can't do through sorrow and sadness, we can do through joy and happiness. So to the happiness and the joy of Purim, l'chaim, l'chaim.
Shakar to Rabbi Druin. Next